Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Orbit Live event. I'm so excited to welcome two fantastic fantasy authors, Andrea Stewart and Evan Winter. Andrea Stewart is the author of the Drowning Empire series, which began with The Bone Shard Daughter. The Bone Shard Emperor, the second book of the trilogy, will be out later this month on November 23rd. Evan Winter is the author of the Burning series, which began with The Rage of Dragons. The Fires of Vengeance, the second book of the series, is out now in paperback. Throughout the event, Andrea and Evan will be answering your questions. You can submit any questions you have by clicking the Ask a Question link below the video. You can also vote on your fellow attendees' questions so that the questions with the most votes are likely answered first. This event is being recorded, and you'll be able to access the replay using the same Crowdcast link you used to enter the event. And now, without further ado, I'll turn the event over to Andrea and Evan.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
The tech
Hey,
issues
Andrea,
were
how you
mine.
doing?
Apologies.
No
good.
worries.
Just, I think we were in the description. It said we were going to talk about second books. So I'm curious what your experience was of writing Fires of Vengeance.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think that with book one, with The Rage of Dragons, I kind of had my whole life to prepare for that. I mean, I wasn't really writing it for my whole life, but everything that I'd read went into that. Everything that I loved went into that. And, and I kind of wasn't under any expectations or pressures. And so I just got to put it together as I saw fit. And then with book two, I had, I think originally a year under contract. Book one's come out, there's expectations. So it was a very different feeling thing. And there was more stress associated with it. And it had become my job. So that also changed things a lot. But I think that I enjoyed the experience. It was more stressful than book one. But I also really liked the chance to try and take what I'd learned from book one and then apply it so that I could tell the story in my head, hopefully, better. And so going to you have book two coming out in like 3 weeks.
Yeah, November 23rd. So
wow. First of all, congratulations. And you had two books come out in a pandemic then, because when book one came out in the pandemic. I'm sorry about that. The books are absolutely amazing. So you know what I mean?
I feel like at least we could contribute something escapist to this terrible moment, right? I think in the beginning of the pandemic, everybody is kind of trapped in their houses. So at least we could kind of provide an escape, I hope.
Yeah, exactly that. And like, I want to ask the same question to you actually about book two, because it was it's still very firm in my memory. How does book two feel to you after having finished book one?
Oh gosh. So that is still very firm in my memory as well. It was very similar in that, I was feeling that pressure and it had become my job. But also I had this experience where I wrote book one really quickly. So that was the seventh manuscript that I had written. Book one was. So, but then I think this is maybe why, I don't know. I knew how to write a first book. So I just banged it out in 3 months, and I was very happy with it. And I didn't have too many revisions. So at that point I was like, oh yeah, I got this. I know how to write a book. And then I sat down to write book two, and it was a completely different experience. I feel like, especially if you have this overarching plot over several books, that you kind of have to weigh things a little bit for middle books, because it's got to have that beginning, middle, and end, but it's also a bridge. So trying to juggle those things, it was an interesting experience. I wrote the whole thing, and then I rewrote a third of it. So it was a lot more of a struggle than for book one. And it took me a little bit over that full year to do. Especially I was pregnant at the time too. And I didn't realize, I was I'm a really high energy person, and it'll be fine. And then I was falling asleep on the couch randomly. So yeah, it was a struggle, but I was very happy with it in the end. Are you working on book three right now? Are you finding that another different experience?
I am, and it is a different experience. I think that I have a lot more. I have more confidence in my process, such that it is, uh, and I'm very excited about it because I get to start now. Like you said, book two ends up being a bit of a bridge book because it's part of this overarching overall story, and hopefully it feels relatively complete on its own. But now, this is book three out of four, so book three could be maybe argued to be also somewhat of a bridge book, but so many things are coming together in this book that it's really exciting for me to start to see all those threads tie together and have all sort of the fallout from that. So it's an exciting book for me, and hopefully for readers as well. And yeah. So I have to ask, given the way that you work with book two and the overall series, are you like more of a plotter, a pantser? Do you sort of not fall into either of those very discrete categories?
I'm definitely a plotter, but whether or not that actually works out once I'm writing it is another question entirely. I plotted book one and it stayed pretty much same to my outline. Book two, not. Book three definitely did not. I wrote it and then I basically deleted the whole thing and started over.
Oh wow.
I mean, I didn't delete it. It went into like a little trash folder. I started rewriting it. I got about a third of the way through, and then I was like, this isn't working either. So I started again, and now I'm almost done with a third iteration. And it's finally like feeling like, okay, this is working. I think sometimes I'll write something into my outline, which seems like it makes a lot of sense at the moment when I'm writing it down. And then I get there and I'm like, what was I thinking? This doesn't like jive with the story. So yeah. Are you like more of a plotter or a pantser?
I'm a hardcore plotter. And so you got me a little nervous there saying that you plot, and it came unraveled on you. What was doing it? Like, was it the characters not feeling like they were meant to travel in the direction that you had hoped they would travel when you got to certain points? What sort of was?
I think it's like story consolidation. Like when I wrote it in the outline, I thought that I had these things laid out pretty well, but when I got into writing it, I realized that the story was not consolidated the way that it should be. So these characters' experiences were not like overlapping the way that they should. I feel like I've learned from it. I hope I've learned from it. So that the next book that I plot, I don't end up doing this like whole rigmarole. But like I was talking to a friend, and that's like when I kind of realized like, oh, like these characters, their plots need to intersect more, and I need to get rid of these side characters that I had created and put in the main characters. It was like that. It was a mess. But usually I would say I'm a hardcore plotter, but I don't know what happened in this book.
Well, I mean, like the level of difficulty is sort of amped up for you, I think, because you've got 5 POVs in Boneshard Daughter, I think it is, right?
Yeah,
and then they all sort of come in and connect and do their whole thing. And so have the POVs gotten more? Not to create any spoilers for the next two, but okay, so you're still dealing with the primary 5?
So I had that part planned from the beginning. I knew there was going to be 5 POVs, and those carry throughout the series, and that's it. I'm not like adding in anymore because I didn't want to do that, like, you know, that plot creep that you get in epic fantasy where you're like, okay, I'm writing a series, and then you start to get away from the characters that people care about. And it's like, I knew this intellectually, and yet I didn't really, I could have saved myself a lot of time if I had figured that in the beginning. But I think like now I know more how to write a second and third book. I hope. I tell people this and they're like, well, I'm like, don't disabuse me of this notion. So
yeah, no. Whenever I see writers who have tons more books than I do under their belts, they're always sort of saying, yeah, every single time it's like a brand new thing, and it's just as hard as it was in the beginning, and you feel like you've learned nothing. And I'm like, don't say that. That's not fun.
Yeah,
I wish to have learned and to be improving and sort of being able to do this faster and easier. But I guess again, every story is different enough that it probably can't come out, you know, more smoothly just because of the experiences you've had before, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like I would like to hold on to the dream of it becoming an easier experience. It's just like when I started out wanting to get published. I don't think I would want people to be telling me like, well, you're going to have to write 7 books before you get there, because it'll be so discouraging. So, you know, I like
Do you
to
feel like any of the do you feel like any of the 7 books could end up making their way into readers' hands, or
Nah.
no?
I feel like, I mean, I have high expectations of myself, you know, and I don't want to put out anything that I'm not happy with anymore. You know, it's like you improve with each book, or you hope you do. And you learn things. And then when you go back and you read your old writing, it's like, there's some like good stuff in there, but it also makes you cringe. And I don't want to like, there's like, I'll probably cannibalize some like ideas that I had that I really liked, but I don't think I'm going to go back. I don't know what your stories, did you have previous books written before Rage of Dragons?
No, actually, Rage of Dragons is the first novel I wrote, and so I'm working on book 3, and this is my 3rd book that I've written. Sort of before that, I've worked in sort of creative fields for a long time, and I sort of had writing as a part of that, but never anything as long or as sort of complicated as a novel. And yeah, and sort of as a question to you, the magic system in Bone Shard Daughter is pretty awesome. So, like with the other sort of the trunk novels, let's say, did you focus on magic systems there as well? Is there lots of like really sort of interesting things that's happening there with magic?
Yeah.
Is that a focus for you?
I really enjoy having some neat and interesting magic systems. I think one of them had very little magic. That was focused more on the relationships between like a few different species. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a thing for me now. So I'm gonna keep doing it. People like it. I like it. I enjoy doing it. So yeah, I'm gonna keep doing it. Oh, and I did want to ask you too, because like I saw that you were a Drizzt fan. So was that like partially like what inspired you with Tau? Because when I was reading Tau, like I'm like, oh man, when he gets like the 2 swords, I'm like, yeah. It's just wish fulfillment, right?
Yeah, fabulous pickup. But that's exactly a huge inspiration. And those books were like formative for me. I love the way that Ari Salvatore writes fight scenes. They're so in the moment, and like literally as I'm reading, the rest of the world feels, well, not literally, I guess metaphorically speaking, the rest of the world feels as if it falls away, and I'm just in the book, just enjoying those scenes. And that's, I sort of came to those books at the perfect time where I was getting old enough to really start to be able to experience novels completely in my head, and to enjoy stories in that way. And so and also I think Forgotten Realms, and specifically Ari Salvatore's books, were kind of like my gateway drug into fantasy, or at least into like fantasy proper, I guess, as opposed to like maybe fantastical stories. So yeah, so no, a huge inspiration. And I think that it was because I enjoyed the action scenes so much, and I enjoyed the idea of how visceral that felt and how alive it felt to me. It was also important to me to try to tell stories that had action. Again, I love watching movies with action. I love stories with action, and so tried to do a little bit of that myself. Speaking of action, you did quite a lot of action as well in Bone Shard Daughter. I think that the some of the climactic scenes are just like they pop right off the page too.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely loved Ari Salvatore's action scenes too. And I feel like action is a good way to like move the story forward a lot of times, like not just having characters moving, but you know, their emotional and mental states as well. But yeah, no, my sister and I were like way into the Drizzt books, and like we like quote some of the fight scene stuff when we were wrestling with each other. So yeah, I know I'm also like a big action scene fan, and especially like I think as I get into later books. I mean, my last one's called The Bone Shard War. There's got to be a lot of action in that. So, should we
exciting already?
Should we start taking questions? Let me see. How
Sure.
do I sort these? Let me see what has the most votes. Okay, let's see. There's 6 votes. How do you approach writing character arcs? Evan, would you like to answer this first?
Ooh, that is a great question. Thank you very much, Evan, for asking it. I think that, let's see, character arcs. I think that character arcs don't come as naturally to me as many other things, which is maybe a bit strange. I'm aware of them on a sort of an intellectual level, and I've tried to read books about them so I understand them better. But I think that because I think that I come plot first, like the story and the themes of the story come to me first, and I guess the character arc comes through the way that the plot and the themes try to play out with one another. So yeah, I don't know that I think as clearly in character arcs as maybe a lot of other people, a lot of other writers do. Like Andrea, what about you? Are you a character arc? Like, is that how you sort of lay everything out?
Yeah, I definitely, like when I'm sitting down and I'm planning out a story, I usually will write down like a little bit about each character, like what their background is, which leads into like what their motivations are and what is stopping them from getting what they want, and also like where I want them to end up. So sometimes a character is struggling with not getting what they want, and the end of that character arc is them getting what they want, but through some character change, by like changing something about their actions or the way that they their beliefs or the way they think about the world, or sometimes that involves the character like wanting something in the beginning and then realizing by the end that they don't want that thing. Maybe they've gotten it by then, maybe they haven't, but yeah, so I kind of think about like what they want and like where they're going to end up and what are the steps that they take emotionally to get there and how that interacts with the plot. Like I know, like with the Bone Shard Daughter, I have like very clear ideas about what each character really wanted and what was stopping them from getting that, and how they end up, like how they end emotionally. Like, Jovis is obviously, he's got the reluctant hero character arc where he's got one thing on his mind, which is he really, really, really wants to find his wife, but he keeps getting pulled into this other stuff, and he's like, no, that's definitely not what I want. But by the end, like, he gets pulled into it and he has a character change. So I think about it like that, basically.
Gotcha, very nice. I guess I'll jump to the next question. Thank you for the question, Essa. Evan, can you speak to how 3 books turned into 4? Yeah, how 3 books turned into 4. Well, they told me that the advances were bigger if you did 4 books versus no. The real answer is that I am a heavy plotter, and so the series was always meant to be 4 books. And the reason for that is because I just kind of like the idea of the sort of the balance that it offers me in terms of when I'm thinking about plotting it. It's 3 books feels like, I know it's supposed to be beginning, middle, end, but for me, I like the idea of sort of, there's 2 sections in the beginning and there's 2 sections at the end that close it off. And also, I think when I was plotting Rage of Dragons, the one thing that kept tripping me up when I was trying to think in terms of a 3-act structure was the idea that the first act is 25%, the last act is 25%, but the middle is 50%. And in almost every sort of structure book or book on writing that I sort of consumed, they all were kind of like, this is how the beginning should be, inciting incident, turning point, this, that, the other. This is where the end should be, climax, denouement, blah, blah. And then for the 50% of your book, half of your actual novel, they'd be like, and this is the middle where stuff happens. I was like, that doesn't seem quite right. But so in order to make it more digestible for me as somebody who had to try and create the story and make it sort of have meaning all the way from beginning, middle to end, I said to myself, I'm not going to do 3 acts, I'm going to do 4 acts. And then I carried that through in terms of the idea for the overall story that's being told across books. I didn't want to do a 3-act book, I wanted to do a 4-act book. So that's why that happened. What about you for 3 acts? I know, or a trilogy, I know that that's sort of common for us in epic fantasy, but is there any sort of other things that made that more natural for you? Or
I think partially because I've read a lot of trilogies, and I kind of, when I was thinking about the story, I'm like, well, these are the three kind of steps that we get to the end. So
Mm-hmm.
when we were sending it out on submission, I did have a little like blurb that I wrote for book 2 and book 3 about like, this is what happens in book 2, this is what's exciting about it, this is what happens in book 3. And those have largely remained the same. I think it's just the fiddly middle, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know where all these characters are starting, I know where they end, but what the heck are they doing in the middle? So, yeah, I mean, it felt very natural to me since I'd read so many trilogies to plot it that way.
Gotcha.
Let me see. What's the next one we have? Oh, ooh, interesting. Do you guys have your next series in mind? Okay. So I'll go ahead and, yes, I do. It's not fully realized yet because I'm still trying to finish book 3. But I do have something that I pitched to my agent that she liked, so I'm gonna keep working on that. But yeah, I know it's got like a cool magic system, of course, and so a really interesting setting, I think. So that's all I'll say, because like who knows what's gonna happen and what's gonna change by the time like it actually gets somewhere. How about you, Evan?
I do have something in mind, and again, just like you, I got to finish. I got to finish this series first, and this series is what I'm completely focused on. So it'll be a couple years before I get to really sit down and dive into the next thing. But I have a rough idea of that I'm interested in pursuing and sort of exploring more and seeing if I can find the story beneath sort of the shiny parts of the idea. So yeah, I'm excited to do that, but because I can see this current series so much more clearly, this one is still the main love. I know that oftentimes it can feel like it's more fun to chase the next thing, but
Yeah.
I'm still chasing this thing and having a good time. So hopefully it stays that way all the way to the bitter end. Let's see here. What else have we got as a story? As a question. Here's a question from Orbit. Thank you, Orbit. Question for both. Do you do your research up front or do you research as you go? Oh, no, sorry. That's Nicholas asked that question through Orbit.
Why don't you go ahead and start, Evan?
Oh, okay. I think that I actually do a bit of both, but a lot of the research does happen on the go. I think that I think it helps me because oftentimes if you do a ton of, okay, I won't speak for anybody else, I'll just speak for myself. Oftentimes if I do a ton of research, what ends up happening is I'm encouraged to put all of that into the book because I've learned it and I think it's really interesting. But if I sort of get to a point and I get stuck, or not stuck, but I just need more information, more detail, I do that research to get that detail, and then I keep going. So that hopefully streamlines the plot and makes it so that if I were to come to the novel as a fresh reader, I would only ever be getting exactly what I need to get me to keep me going, as opposed to getting stuff that maybe sort of starts to deviate from the actual story that I'm trying to tell. So, yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I think I take a similar approach. Like before I start writing a book, I have an idea of the setting, and I just go to the library and I check out a bunch of books and I just read things, and I don't take notes. I read things and I kind of know like what sounds interesting. And then, I kind of like try to absorb that. And then I start writing. And then obviously I always run into things that I'm like, oh, crap, I don't actually know this. Like today I was writing a scene and I'm like, how do people drive ox carts? Like, what do you... There's no horses with reins, so what do you do with oxen? I don't know. So I was like, oh, I'm going to have to go back and look that up so I don't look like a complete fool. But yeah, so I do a lot of the researching as I go. I do a little bit or a lot up front too, just to kind of get the feel for the world. Like when I was reading stuff for the Bone Shard Daughter, I was like reading like travel books and historical books just based on like island nations and stuff. And some of the stuff I was reading, like I remember I noted like, oh, like sometimes people do stilt fishing where they'll go out on stilts and like fish in water that way. And I was like, oh, well, that's like a thing I definitely want to put in there for that kind of background info. So yeah, it's kind of like that, like a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like in Bone Chardora, the islands and the way that they just come across is they feel super magical, but also like I can just picture them as almost an element in our world, but then with all the little sort of ideas of the magical nature of that sort of overlaid. So it's really wonderful, and the divers and the idea that the islands probably sort of curve in eventually, and what's underneath, and you set up a ton of mysteries. I feel like, and I loved it because they kept me going. I was like, oh, I gotta keep reading because I wanted to know what you were going to introduce next and what you were going to tell me next, which
Yeah,
for me is
I think
wonderful.
that's one of the things that I really enjoy about world building is those things that we don't know that are, because like we don't know everything about our world, right? Like every time I look stuff up about the Mariana Trench, I'm like, whoa, it's crazy down there. So I like to have that sense that we don't know everything about this world, although, you know, you're going to be able to discover things as the story goes on.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things I just really enjoy about world building. Let me see. Oh, what are you both currently reading? I'm like mostly reading ARCs and stuff and trying to catch up with that.
Yeah.
So I'm like, right now I'm reading my friend's book Mystic Skies, which is like the third in his trilogy. So I'm like blanking on the name of the first one. It's by Jason Denzel. So I'm reading the third book in that currently.
Nice. Yeah, I'm doing the same. I'm reading a bunch of advanced reader copies that won't be out till maybe late next year, I'm thinking, and trying to catch up because I'm a little bit behind there.
What's like the most recent like book that's out that you've read?
The most recent book that's out that I've read. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad. I always forget.
If you can remember.
In an epic fantasy or just in general, I guess.
Oh, in general, sure. Why not?
In general. Oh my gosh, I'm awful at names. What have I just read? I'm listening to The Warmth of Other Suns. I read the last book in Will White's Cradle series. I've been reading the series. I'm all caught up except for the latest one, which just came out. So I'm going to check that one out as soon as I'm a bit closer to the deadline to finishing what I need to finish on the book. Yeah, I think those are two things that I've been into recently.
Yeah, that reminds me. I am listening to Jade War right now.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Yeah. I forgot. I listened to a lot of books. But yeah, so I like did a re-listen of Jade City so I could kind of remember everything that happened. And then I moved directly into Jade War because I kind of really enjoy consuming like a series like all at once. Just, you know, immersing myself in that world and having that continual story. So I'm going to finish that. And then by then Jade Legacy will be out. So then I can just move on right onto that one as well.
Excellent. Yeah. Now, do you find you listen, like what's your listen to read ratio?
I listen to way more because
really? Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, I jog my kid over to my sister's place every day and I jog her back. So when I'm doing that, I'm like listening to audiobooks. And then also when I'm like running errands or like cleaning or anything like that. And then I listen to them like faster than the narrators probably want me to. So I kind of burn through those credits.
What speed do you listen at? What's your listen speed?
So it's usually 1.5 to 2 times depending on the narrator. Basically. Yeah. Because I find it
sweet.
Yeah. It's like one of those hacks, right? You're like, woo, I'm consuming more books.
I love doing that too, and I wonder, and I kind of feel bad, but I wonder if narrators feel like, oh, you're destroying my artistry, and I hope not. But like, I still get the story, and I still absorb it all, and I still very much enjoy it. But like, yeah, it just feels like that works for me, and I don't know why.
Well, quick anecdote. So, John works on a video game. He's a software engineer, and the animators got really mad because people kept speeding up the animation for the battles so they could get through them faster. So they went and like made the animations really slow, and then they had to go and tell them, hey, you can't do that. You have to actually Yeah, so I think maybe they might be upset because it's not the way it's intended to be listened to, but I'm sure that opinions vary among narrators.
Right? Oh my gosh, I feel so guilty because so much of the work is amazing. Like, I mean, it sounds self-serving, but I'm a big fan of the narrator of my books. I'm a big fan of Stephen Pacey's, who does Joe Abercrombie's books, and so like, but I listen to both faster than normal because it just works for me, and I love it like that. So
yeah, and that's one of the things too. It's like the sad thing is I feel like the better a narrator is, the faster that I listen to it. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. I think because like. They're telling the story in a way that you can absorb all the main details, even if you are going faster than it was originally recorded.
Yeah, and still get that emotion and everything. Oh, I think there's one for you. What are some of the more difficult aspects of the storyline development of The Burning?
Thanks, Joel. Great question. I think that I'll put it this way. One of my good friends, his name's Anthony, and we've been friends since I was 12. And when I first went to his house to trick or treat for Halloween, because our mothers made him, he didn't want me to come, and our parents made him. His other friend who was supposed to come canceled, and so we had to sleep over, and we've been best friends ever since because I guess our parents pushed us together. So that's kind of awesome. But he is a super critical thinker. Like that's just his thing. He works in a very sort of critical thinking focused field. And I think one of the things that really I focus on with The Burning is telling a story, trying, at least as far as I'm able, telling a story that he would have trouble picking apart in terms of the rationale for why things happen, why people act as they do. Because together we watched a bunch of movies. We grew up enjoying science fiction and fantasy as well. And so we'd sit there in movie theaters and we'd go, or read books together or movie theaters, and we'd go, they wouldn't do that. Why would that happen? And we'd sort of pick things apart like that. And we just didn't understand the justifications of certain characters. We didn't understand how the world building fit together. So it is a focus for me to try and tie those things as tightly together as I can. Now, of course, it's not going to work for everybody. And in terms of maybe I'll be focused on one element of world building that makes everything make more sense to me in terms of how it all works. But another reader might be like, that's not as interesting to me, and because you didn't focus on this, the whole thing doesn't flow as smoothly or feel as determinist. Like it doesn't feel as much like the A leads to B leads to C in a sort of the most either natural or compelling way. So it's always, I think, a matter of subjectivity. Like, how do you read? What do you prefer? What do you enjoy? But definitely, I try to plug all the holes so that a reader who probably reads like me will feel that it's airtight. I hope. And
Evan,
what about you?
Well, I have to say, it sounds like you might enjoy the Screen Rant pitch meetings on YouTube. I don't know if people.
I love those.
Yeah, so I was like, if he hasn't seen those, he should really see those because it sounds like he would really like them. Yeah, because they go through.
I love those.
All the plot holes. It's very funny.
I watch those all at 2x speed as well on YouTube, and I actually use them. I watch them and I go, okay, they're picking on this, and they're sort of saying that doesn't work. And I try to actually think of a lot of time after I've watched one, I think about the story that I'm telling, and I go, okay, could that argument be levied against the work that I'm doing? And if it could, and I agree with the argument, I need to plug that hole. So I actually very much enjoy them. And I'm not gonna say I use them as a study guide, but I definitely sort of have picked up lots of tips from Screen Rant. So thanks for bringing that up. That's great.
Yeah, those are great videos.
And actually, I want to ask this sort of the same question fired back at you. What were the most difficult aspects of storyline development for the series?
Oh gosh, I think just that story consolidation, like trying to make sure that everything was intersecting in a way that makes sense, and that I think like if I know that the characters have to be ending up in one place, making sure that they get there in the most reasonable way. Like I always have to stop myself sometimes where I'm like, well, they just have to be over here, and I'm like, whoa. But what are they thinking? Like, what are they feeling in this moment? Like, what makes sense for them to do? So for me, that's, I think, like the most difficult thing is I think I'm always thinking about the ending. And when I really need to be looking at like what is happening in this moment.
Yeah, I feel like that's the trickiest part as being, for me at least, being a plotter, is I never want the characters, I never want the people in this world to feel like they're puppets on strings, because they're not to me. In my head, they're not. In the outline, they're not. It feels as if the story's being told to me, and I see it naturally. But then I feel as if the disconnect sometimes is between my brain and my hands. Like, I see the story and I know what it is, and they all feel like they're doing what they need to do and they're going where they need to go with perfect motivations. But then I try and write it and it gets clunky, and then hopefully I can fix it in sort of revisions where I have to be like, I haven't told the story that's in my head as clearly enough as I want. But I feel like that's sort of a tricky thing if you're more plotter sort of focused, is that the characters can sometimes take a back seat to what's happening, and it's sort of a struggle to make that not happen.
Yeah, I think I don't know. It's a constant struggle, anyways. I don't think that anybody gets it right on the first try, or at least I hope they don't, because I'd feel terrible if that were true.
No, same here. I love revision. That's where, like, if any magic happens at all, that is where that magic happens. So.
Well, for me, apparently, it's in rewriting. Well, it is right now. It's
like
terrible.
Whole chunks of no.
Yeah, yeah, just throwing chunks of it away and redoing it. Yeah.
Oh.
Let me see. We have the way you each approach interweaving character arcs is absolutely brilliant. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Any tips for how to make character paths intersect or tie together? Oh, do you want to start with that one, Evan? I'm going to think about that.
Okay, yeah. I think that you definitely do this more than I do, so I will give a short, brief answer and sort of pass it to you, definitely. I think that for me, again, because I'm a heavy outliner and I sort of see the story that way, I see it in bits and pieces that are kind of vague. There's like, I see some parts and then the rest of it sort of sits in the fog. But then as I focus on the parts that I can see, the fog lifts slightly and I can see the other bits and I can grab hold of them and bring them in so I understand the story better. And my series is primarily single POV, and we meet other characters and we're in their heads for moments, but it is really sort of Tao's story that's being told. So I think that makes it a lot easier, and I have nothing but admiration for authors who do these multiple POV things and make it all come together and do magical things. Andrea?
Well, so I have it very clearly in my head for what was going on in book one. As far as how each of the characters were going to interact and where they had to end up at the end of the book, because I already knew what was going to happen in book 2 and book 3. So that kind of sets up the way that those characters have to interact in book 1, because so I know, like, in the beginning, I'm glad that people stayed on for the ride, because I know, like, the characters don't interact very much. There's like a small bit where Jovis like runs into Renami, and then it's not till the end that you kind of see everything coming together. And I knew I wanted to kind of tell these disparate stories that were also going to affect one another. We have people in different parts of the society, and I kind of wanted to show how all these world events were affecting them. Book 2 was actually pretty straightforward as well, because I knew, okay, well, this is where they end in book 1, and these are the events of book 2, and this is how they're going to clash with one another. And that's one of the things that I think about when I think about the character arcs and how they're intersecting is what are the conflicts in there, and how would that affect these characters when they meet? So some of the characters have a same ending vision of what they want the world to be like, but they have very different ways that they think that they should get there. So obviously they're going to clash in some way. So planning out how that intersected was not too difficult, because I knew that they were going to butt heads over these things. Book 3, that was where I kind of like fell apart a little bit. So I don't know if I'm even qualified to give advice, because I'm still learning some of these things. But that was something that when I talked over the plot with my friend, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. It's just not coming together. And this is Megan O'Keefe, by the way. She's brilliant. Because she was like, oh, like you have these like characters that are interacting, but this is like a new character. People don't care about that character, and it doesn't really make sense for that story consolidation, because I knew it was kind of going off in every direction. So basically, it made a lot more sense there for me to take those characters out, those minor characters, and to have the main characters kind of sit in that spot instead. So I do have the characters interacting a lot in book 3 as well, and you can kind of see how they influence one another. I mean, for me, I think one of the most fun things is like to create these very disparate characters and then throw them in a room together and then see like how they react to one another. That's always really fun because I know when I've read epic fantasy and you're like following this one character and you're following this other character and they finally meet, like that is like reader candy for me, and I really wanted to do that kind of thing in my book as well.
Nice. Let's see. I'm gonna peer through these questions here. This is always tough for me, but let's see. Actually, no, I'll ask this one. Andrea, what inspired or how did you come up with the characters and which POV to follow?
Well, when I started, I knew 2 characters. One was Lynn. I knew I wanted to have a character who was trying to live up to her father's unreasonable expectations. No relation to real life. Well, I just like, and I knew that I wanted her to have, to be trapped in this like palace of locked doors and to be kind of like solving these mysteries. So that was like a character that definitely came to me very quickly. And the other one was Jovis, where I knew I wanted to have a character who was like a little bit more lighthearted, although he had depth, and who was like a smuggler and kind of living on the fringes of society. So that was kind of what inspired him. Like I wanted this like Han Solo kind of character where he's like very grumpy, but he's got like a heart of gold, which you kind of like discover throughout the course of the book. And then the other ones kind of fell into place while I was thinking about the story, because I knew that I wanted it to be about this empire that's on the brink of revolution. So I knew I had to have these characters that were experiencing that. So that came in with Renami and Falu, where they're, kind of, they're in love, but they're also have very different viewpoints about the world, and they're kind of reconciling that. And then Sand, I knew that was going to play a role in the overall arc of the books. So I was like, okay, I need to have this character over here too. So it was kind of like a cascading thing. I think like authors, I talk about it like growing a book, because you start with like a few story seeds and you're like, okay, well, how do I make these work together? And then what follows logically from there? What do I need to tell this story? So that's kind of how I started. I had like these 2 characters, and then I thought like, this is the overarching story that I want. Like, what other characters do I need to tell this story? So that's kind of how it happened for me. So since that was a me question though, actually, like, what inspired you, Evan, like with Tao and the what characters that you wanted to follow? Because I know you said that you knew you just wanted it to be Tao with some side characters. Like, what inspired that decision?
My goal with sort of the first book was to try and tell the perfect story for me, and so part of that was looking at everything that I'd read and figuring out what I loved the most about the different stories. And for me, one of the tricky things about epic fantasy, which is my like home genre, it is what I adore, is that a lot of times, like you said, with sort of character creep, you end up with a lot of POVs, and it's very difficult for them all to feel balanced to a reader. It's very difficult for you to fall in love with each of them equally. So every so often you'll come up to a POV and you're like, okay, now I got to spend the next half an hour of reading in this person's head that I don't really enjoy. I'm not really digging where their storyline's going and all the rest. And so as part of my little experiment to tell a story that would be absolutely perfect for me, I said, I'm new to this. I don't want to sort of step so far into my depth that I fall on my face. So I'm not going to tell a ton of I'm not going to tell a story with a ton of POVs, because that seems to up the difficulty. And also, I really enjoy stories where I get to see a story where I get to see a plot go from A to B to C all the way to Z as cleanly and as clearly as possible. So I'll have one primary POV and we'll follow that character. And also, I like the idea of that because it allows readers to pick up the book and start it. And if they don't like it, they can put it down pretty quickly, because you're not sort of struggling through the book and going, I love Tao, but I hate this other person and this other person. So it's sort of a real grind that way. Hopefully, if you enjoy watching Tao go through this story, you'll enjoy the books. And so it was me just trying to tell a story that would feel perfect for me, and then hoping that either through indie publishing or whatever partners I have, Orbit in this case, could find the right reader for that book. So the right reader who would hopefully enjoy it. And I feel very fortunate. I think they have. A lot of people have reached out to me and they seem to enjoy the work. So I think that Orbit's done a fantastic job, and I feel lucky. I feel fortunate for that. Yeah. So, we have a question here from Joel. Who are your favorite authors?
Oh, goodness.
It's a tough one.
Who are your favorite authors? You can start.
No, that's the worst. What is this? Uno reverse card? What is that? No, I am really, really bad at this question. I will say that I thought I'll start with some of the basics, not because they're basic, but because it's easy for me to get these out. George R.R. Martin sort of changed the way I looked at fantasy in a lot of ways. Robert Jordan was one of the first ones where I was like, this is epic fantasy. And I sat there literally for like 5-10 hours a day reading those books. Ari Salvatore did this, was sort of the same, and like my gateway drug. N.K. Jemisin is brilliant. Octavia Butler and her book Kindred blew me all the way away. Like I just didn't like. It's not epic fantasy in that way, but it's speculative fiction, and that book was amazing. So I guess I'll start there. Anyway, what about for you?
Well, all of those authors that you listed, definitely. When I think about like nostalgically, I really enjoyed Robin McKinley. Like her book, The Blue Sword, was like very formative for me. And then Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, if we're talking like older. Definitely the Dragonlance series was like blew me away, and then the Deathgate cycle was really good. I don't know if it holds up. I haven't like gone back to read any of those. I hope it does. Let me see. Melanie Ron was a big one too. I really loved like those big chunky epic fantasies. I think Robert Jordan for me was like the first as well that I picked up, and I was like, whoa, what is this? I think my brother had started reading it first, and then, as a younger sibling, of course, like you go and you steal what they're doing. So, and Octavia Butler is like a huge favorite of mine. Like I cannot recommend her enough to people. I was kind of at that point where I had read all of her books except Kindred, and I had that on my shelf, and I just like let it sit there for a while because I didn't want it to be the last one. But I did finally read it, and it blew me away. I just loved it. And I've loved all of her books, basically. I think they're all brilliant.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, well, we managed to get through that question. That's always a tough one for me. I struggle with it. Let's see. How important was it to have an animal companion in your series?
Oh, very important. I mean, when I was sitting down to plan the Bone Jar Daughter and the sequels and everything, I just thought about, like, what do I really love reading? And I'm just going to, like, throw a lot of the stuff that I really enjoy in there. And I knew that I wanted to have magical animal companion in this one. Because I love reading them in other books. I mean, it's like every time I read a magical animal companion in another book, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had that like as a pet, right? Like, the Pern series with the dragons, like that was like amazing when I was a kid. And then again, the Blue Sword, where she's got like a special horse and a special cat. I mean, yeah, I knew I had to have that in there. It was very, very important to me.
I feel like I have Mephi theories. I have not read Bone Shard Emperor yet. I feel like I have Mephi theories and Magical Companion theories, but maybe I'm very, very wrong on off base. I'm going to have to find out.
Oh,
I'm just
people
investigating
have
this.
messaged me their theories, which
Oh.
some of them are close and some of them are really far off, and it's always like really entertaining to me. Okay, Evan, you have a question here. When I read your character deaths and how they affect Tao, I feel deeply that pain too because of how invested I became. What is it like for you emotionally to write these deaths?
They hit hard as well, I think, and I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I wouldn't say that I'm like a method writer, like there's method actors necessarily, but I do try to be as in the moment with them as I possibly can be. Now, because I do plot, I've lived with sort of all the story beats, all the moments of the story for a long time. But when it's actually comes time to draft, it is important for me to try as hard as I can to feel what's being felt. And it's also important for me to deal with death as I do, as I try to, because I think that for me there feels as if there is a responsibility if I am describing, depicting, discussing violence to try to understand, deal with, and explore the fallout of that violence. There's nothing more devastating that can be done than to take or end than to take life, to end it prematurely. And the loss that occurs when that happens does not just occur because there is the loss of the life before you, but it is cutting off all of the sort of future possibilities and relationships that individual had. There is a loss to the mother, the father, the sons, the daughters, everybody around that individual. And so that's sort of the way I think about it. And I try hard as I can to sort of make that part of the ethos of the work. And and hopefully it comes across. And what about you? Actually, how do you deal with character deaths? And
I'm terrible. Well, I sit and I write it, and I get like really emotionally involved, and I get really into the story. But then afterwards, I kind of cackle a little bit to myself.
Oh,
I'm
no.
like, yes, this like serves a story, and how are people going to feel about this? So I delight in it, in that it serves the story and that it makes it better. But I do feel sad while I'm writing it because I am like trying to, channel the emotions of the character, and I'm in that character's POV as I'm writing it. So it's a very mixed bag for me. And I think it depends on the character who's dying too. If it's a character that you're kind of like, then it's pretty joyful. But yeah.
oh, man.
Let me see. I think we have only a few minutes left. Okay. What do you do with chunks of a story you decide not to use? Do you ever change your mind and plug those chunks back in?
I'll say that I always save them because it makes it easier to take them out. Because otherwise I feel like all sorts of type of way about taking them out, and I can't do it. So I save them, and they go into a special little file and everything else. But I don't think I've ever used anything that I've taken out. And I think that that's probably going to be the way going forward. There's usually a reason it comes out for me. So yeah, no, never put anything back in, but I save them because otherwise I can't take them out in the first place. What about you?
Yeah, I basically do the same thing. I put them in a little trash folder, and I'm like, I'll come back to you later. And then I never do. I don't keep those promises. So, I mean, sometimes I'll be like, oh, well, maybe I can use this chunk, and then I'll look at it and then realize that it doesn't fit. But yeah, I mean, it's just the same way. I don't use them. Tell myself I will, but yeah.
Okay. Shall we try and go through like another 2 questions really quickly or something?
Sure, let's do that. Have you been anticipating or dreading the big climax of your final novel? That's a good one.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent question, Essa.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And it would be wonderful if you could go first, Andrea. You could.
Yeah. Since I'm like getting right up to writing it right now. I'm definitely anticipating it because I've had all these pieces in my head, and I know like exactly what happens in the final climax. So writing the ending climax to a book is always very fast for me, and I enjoy that rush. And also like all those emotions that the characters are feeling and that kind of catharsis. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, no, I think it's the same for me. It definitely writes faster. It's weird how that happens, right? Like when you have those big climax scenes where everything's coming together and all the threads are sort of really finally like pulling tight, it writes faster. I feel it more, and it's like a massive rush. Even though it takes days and days and days and days to finish the whole thing, it's a massive rush. So yeah, I very much look forward to it, and yeah, it's exciting. It's one of the best parts, I think, right?
Yeah, writing the end and like just like full of all those characters' emotions, and it's amazing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one more question that we'll do.
Yeah.
Would these books be suitable to recommend to teens? What do you think about yours?
I think it depends on the parent. My books have a lot of violence. I would be fine if my son read them in maybe he's 10. He could read them almost now, but that would be a me thing and a my choice. I think that you have to be aware that there's a lot of violence in the books, and it's just about whether a parent feels it's appropriate for their child or not. What about you?
I think yes. It's hard for me to say. I don't know if my opinion is great either, because I read a lot of stuff I probably shouldn't have when I was a kid, because my parents were not like, oh, like, what are you reading? And like, let's see what's in here. So I checked out a bunch of books from the library that were probably like a lot. I mean, my reading level was old, but my mental and emotional capacity was not. But I think mine are pretty, and they're not like terribly violent. I think it gets a little bit darker in the second and the third books, but I know like I have a French translation that's being marketed as YA, and I'm like, that fits, I think, with some of the themes. So I think it's like, yeah, I think it would be fine.
I'll say I think it was for me it was interesting because they're like horror-esque like components to Bone Shard Daughter that I loved. Like I'm all about that vibe, and I was down with it. And I think they're, like you say, they're wonderfully played, because it's not like you sort of like revel in them or anything, but they're just there as a part of the nature of that world. So yeah, I very much enjoy that aspect of it.
I think that's definitely a thing of mine too, is like a little bit of body horror. So that's okay. The series as well, because I just love it.
Oh man.
Well, thank you. This was an amazing set of questions, and it was awesome chatting with you, Evan. That's really fun. I loved your book, so yeah. I haven't read the second one yet either, but it's on my TBR.
No worries. I'm excited to pick up Bone Shard Emperor, and again, November 23rd, right?
Yes.
3 weeks.
3 more weeks, yeah.
Yeah, pre-order now if you get the chance, because again, with all this weird paper shortages and everything that's happening in publishing, you got to get in there and do that as fast as you can. Oh, there we go.
Oh my god.
You got to get in there and do that as fast as you can.
I've not seen enough pictures of your cat still. So
we'll remedy that. He's like jumping all over the place here. But yeah, no, pre-order the Bone Shard Emperor as soon as you can, because there are paper shortages happening. It's this sort of crazy thing that's, I guess, got something to do with the pandemic and perhaps other factors. So yeah. And thank you everyone for showing up. And like, this was, I really enjoyed this, and getting to pick your brain was awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Super fun. And yay for Drizzt.
Totally.